Hey guys, tonight we freeze slowly. You've just arrived at a Viking winter camp somewhere between middle of nowhere and just shy of permanent frostbite. The sky above is a flat gray that doesn't blink, and the trees around the camp lean in like gossiping old women. The air, it cuts through your clothes with all the gentleness of a broadsword dipped in ice. You're not a warrior, not yet. You're something softer, rounder. You showed up with a pack, a nervous smile, and the completely misguided belief that you'd be welcomed with warm mead and tales of glory. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Bonus points if you're somewhere warm. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first step into the camp is into a puddle that might be a puddle or might be soup. No one tells you which. It soaks into your boots. Your toes go numb. You squint at the hut's low, turf-roofed, smoky things that look like they were built by angry beavers and grudging optimism. The people here don't smile. They stare. One of them spits. Not at you, just in your direction. You're shown to your spot in the longhouse. It's not near the fire. It's not near anything. It's just a space between a pile of fishing nets and a sleeping goat named Helga. You smile. Helga doesn't. Historians still argue how hospitable Viking winter camps really were. Some sources claim tight-knit camaraderie and shared stories by the hearth. Others describe frostbitten strangers sleeping under their own cloaks, while the seasoned warriors debated whether to eat the weak. You start to unpack. Someone takes your bag. No one explains. You nod and sit down on a hide that smells like wet regrets. Your fringe fact tonight. Archaeologists once found a Viking latrine site where the preserved feces contained evidence of both parasites and onions. This means someone thought, yes, this stew needs onions, even while freezing and infested. Welcome to the camp. You're not warm. You're not welcome. And the goat is eyeing your gloves like they're tonight's dessert. No firewood, just regret and wet moss. You wake up, or rather, you stop trying to pretend you're asleep when a lump of frost falls from the rafters and lands squarely on your face. It melts just slowly enough to ruin your morning. Around you, the longhouse groans. The air smells like sweat, old smoke, and something that might have once been cabbage but now feels more like a warning. Everyone else is already up. The fire out, the coals dead, the hearth cold enough to question your life choices. You wrap your cloak tighter though, honestly. It's more decorative than effective, and you stumble outside with a wooden bucket and the faint hope of gathering something burnable. There is no kindling. There is no dry wood. There is only regret. And moss. So much moss. You find a few damp branches under a half-frozen log. They snap reluctantly, like they're annoyed at being disturbed. You carry them back to camp, triumphant in the way only the desperate can be. Someone watches you dump the load near the hearth. He smirks, then pulls out his firewood dry. Perfect. Likely smuggled from a forest kissed by fire spirits, or maybe just stored under a roof like a sensible human being. He doesn't share. You try to light yours. It hisses. It steams. It laughs at you. You blow. You pray. You mutter to Thor, or maybe Loki, "You're not picky right now." Nothing catches. Historians still argue how Vikings kept fires going in winter camps, whether each hut maintained its own hearth, or if communal fires were kept alive by dedicated guards. What's certain is that once a fire went out, getting it back was not guaranteed. Your fringe fact tonight. Some Viking settlements used dried fish skins as fire starters, which means even the worst part of dinner could serve one final purpose, igniting hope. You poke the moss. It smolders for one glorious second, then dies. Someone passes behind you and tosses a scrap of kindling into the hearth, almost by accident. The fire catches. You don't thank him. You know better now. Gratitude in the camp isn't expected. It's suspicious. You sit near the tiny flame and warm your hands, which are now the color of boiled turnips. The fire grows just enough to make the room slightly less miserable. Not cozy, not even survivable, just less fatal. That's your new standard. A man nearby nods to your woodpile and says, "You fetch like a hungry dog." You reply, "At least I found something." He shrugs. Dogs are better company. You smile, but only on the inside, because if you use up your face muscles, you'll lose body heat. And in a Viking winter camp, even your expressions have to ration warmth. You're sleeping on ice and old meat. Night doesn't fall in the Viking camp, it collapses, like a drunken giant hurling darkness over the world and snoring on your face. The cold doesn't sneak up on you. It just is unapologetic, unrelenting. You try to sleep. It's not going well. Your assigned sleeping spot is a fur-covered plank, raised just a few inches above the packed earth. Beneath that frozen mud, beneath that, probably a glacier plotting your demise. The plank creaks under you. It smells faintly of sweat, vaguely of herring, and exactly like something that's absorbed more sadness than soap. The fur covering it isn't warm, it's decorative. The kind of pelt that says, "I used to be a fox, and now I'm mostly a suggestion." Helga the goat is curled up beside you again. She has the audacity to snore. You wrap yourself in your cloak. Then in the other cloak, someone tossed to you out of either pity or passive aggression. It still has a fishbone tucked into the collar. You leave it there. Feels wrong to move it now. You try not to shiver too obviously, because shivering, apparently, is embarrassing. The warriors around you sleep like boulders stone-faced, silent, wrapped in layers of fur and ego. Occasionally, one rolls over and lets out a noise that sounds like a bear muttering its taxes. Someone farts. It's definitely the Jarl. You pretend not to notice. Historians still argue how communal Viking sleeping quarters were arranged. Some evidence points to family units bundled together. Other finds suggest travelers and outsiders were placed closer to the door, which explains why your blanket occasionally flutters from the wind inside the house. Your fringe fact tonight: some Viking winter bedding was stuffed with dried seaweed, not for comfort, just insulation. You haven't earned seaweed yet. You're on the sleep near the fish rack tier. You shift. Something crinkles under the plank. You pull it out. It's a scrap of jerky, or possibly ancient meat that evolved sentience during the Dark Ages. You throw it outside. Helga follows it. Brief warmth leaves with her. You curl tighter. The warrior nearest to you has taken his boots off. You can smell them. They tell a story, a very tragic one, about mold and betrayal. You press your face into the plank. It's cold, damp, unforgiving. Kind of like the camp itself. But you're learning now. This isn't a place that wants you comfortable. It wants you useful. Or invisible. And right now you're both. You close your eyes. The last thing you hear before sleep is someone whispering a prayer to Thor, something about not waking up encased in frost. You whisper the same, and try not to dream of blankets you'll never see again. The latrine is a hole of doom. Morning starts, as it always does in the Viking winter camp, with frost crusted on your eyebrows and the deep, painful knowledge that nature has called loudly, urgently, and with absolutely no sense of decency. You trudge outside into air so cold it should come with the warning label. Your boots crunch over frozen earth. Somewhere in the woods, a raven laughs at you. Probably personally. You follow the well-worn path down a gentle slope toward the latrine. It's not marked by a sign. No one here believes in that kind of optimism. It's just a narrow trench cut into the ground, surrounded by low stakes and poorly arranged moss for privacy. The smell hits you before the wind does. It's apocalyptic. You breathe through your mouth, instantly regretting it. You contemplate leaving, pretending your bladder has transcended this mortal realm. But it hasn't. You approach. You glance around, hoping for solitude. Too bad. A warrior is already there, squatting, humming a lullaby you now can't unhear. You turn your back. He does not stop humming. You wait. The cold starts to feel like a second skeleton trying to escape your skin. Finally, it's your turn. You shuffle forward, balance yourself, and lower into what might be the least dignified position known to human history. The wind gusts. It's direct. You discover the exact opposite of warmth. The kind of chill that hits your soul and leaves a note that reads, "See you next time." Historians still argue about Viking hygiene and latrine placement. Some settlements had wooden outhouses, others relied on open pits. There's evidence of waste being repurposed into fertilizer, and less pleasantly, evidence that shoes weren't always worn near the latrine. Your fringe fact tonight? One excavation revealed a latrine site where the soil preserved layers of pollen, parasites, and what might be apple peel, suggesting someone had a snack mid-visit. That's bold. You finish quickly. There's no wiping. There is moss. You do not enjoy it. You return to the longhouse with a gait that suggests you've survived something awful. No one acknowledges your return, but the goat looks at you like it knows. You sit by the hearth. You're numb. Spiritually, someone offers you a piece of dried fish. You take it, even though it crunches like it has opinions. And you realize something truly bleak. You'll have to do this again tomorrow. Same path, same pit, same wind that whispers. You chose this. You pull your cloak tighter. You chew your fish slowly. And you remind yourself that in this camp, dignity is a summer thing. Odin isn't helping you chop wood. The axe is heavier than you expected. It has that kind of weight that feels personal, like it knows you've never split anything harder than a pine cone. The handle's worn smooth by hands that probably killed a bear before breakfast. Yours currently blistering after 3 swings. The log doesn't care. It sits there smugly, mocking you with its solid Viking indifference. It's cold, knotted, and more frozen than your toes, which is saying something, because your toes haven't felt anything since sunrise. You line up your swing again. Miss. Again. Miss. Someone nearby chuckles. You look up. A group of warriors are watching, casually, eating dried fish and pretending not to enjoy the show. You adjust your grip. Swing again. This time, the axe bounces off the surface like it hit a shield made of old gods and sarcasm. Your arms vibrate from wrist to shoulder. You think about crying. Then you remember the rule: no one cries here unless a sibling dies or a sword breaks. You take a breath, reset, swing, finally crack. The log splits. Kind of. A sliver falls off, which counts. You don't celebrate, but you do glare at it like, that's right, I'm dangerous now. Historians still argue how much daily labor Viking warriors actually did in winter camps. Some suggest they trained constantly while slaves and settlers handled chores. Others note that many warriors were also farmers and craftsmen, and if you wanted a warm bed, you chopped your own fuel. Your fringe fact tonight? In some sagas, poorly split firewood was a metaphor for weak masculinity. One tale describes a man so mocked for his bad chopping that he left the village, joined a raiding crew, and never returned. You relate? A warrior named Erland tosses you another log. That one's got ice in it. Of course it does. You nod, lift the axe again. The second log doesn't split. It explodes, sending shards of wood everywhere like one hits your leg. You pretend it doesn't hurt. Erland whistles. Almost impressive. Almost. That's the closest thing to encouragement you've gotten in days. You wipe your brow. The sweat freezes instantly. You're not warm, but you're not dead. So, success. By the end of the hour, you've split 5 logs. Your hands are shaking. Your back's done negotiating. Your breath forms little clouds of misery in front of your face. But you've earned it. A handful of twigs, 2 logs, and a comment that wasn't entirely mockery. You carry the wood back toward the longhouse. As you pass the warriors, one raises an eyebrow. Odin smiles on the strong. You want to say, then he's definitely frowning at me. Instead, you nod. Because here, sarcasm is the only warmth that's free. The mead is frozen, the mood worse. Evening settles like wet fur, heavy, musty, and reluctant to leave. The longhouse dims as the fire gutters and the shadows return to their usual corners. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, pretending your knees don't sound like cracking ships every time you shift. A jug of mead gets passed around. It sloshes sluggishly. By the time it reaches you, it's half frozen and smells like something that died, was mourned, and then fermented out of spite. You take a sip. It tastes like regret with a hint of honey. You try not to grimace. The warrior next to you watches carefully. He has a beard that could store secrets and a brow like a boulder. He nods once when you don't spit it out. You've passed a test. Congratulations. You're now allowed to sit in silence with the men who have seen things you can't even mispronounce. Someone across the fire begins a story. It involves a bear, 3 swords, and a man named Ulf who allegedly lost his pants in the snow and still managed to win a duel. Everyone laughs. You laugh too. A beat too late. The room quiets. Someone says, Ulf died choking on goat bones. Everyone nods solemnly. Someone else says, but he killed the goat first, and the laughter returns. Historians still argue how Vikings consumed alcohol, whether mead was a daily staple or reserved for rituals and celebration. Some texts suggest warriors drank heavily in winter to warm the spirit. Others describe structured, even sacred, drinking customs tied to toasts and oaths. Your fringe fact tonight. One Norse saga details a feast so long that participants hallucinated wolves and snow gods. Turns out the mead had been brewed with mushrooms. You wonder if tonight's batch contains visions, or just mild regret. You sip again, still frozen. Someone nearby taps a bone spoon against a wooden bowl rhythmically, starting a low chant. Others join in, half singing, half droning, like thunder that decided to become music. You hum along, sort of, your voice is thin, unsteady, but the act of making sound with them, even if it's just to say, "I'm here," feels important. Then someone hands you a chunk of bread. It's hard enough to qualify as a weapon, but you accept it like gold. You gnaw quietly. Across the room, a couple of warriors are arm wrestling. Another carves runes into a bone. You're not part of the group. Not really, but you're in the room. And that's something. You finish your mead, most of it. Anyway, your lips are sticky. Your tongue is numb. Your mood's still worse. But at least you're not the one who choked on goat bones. Small victories. Everyone else can fight. You can stir porridge. At dawn, you wake to shouting. Not alarm. Just training. Outside, the warriors are already grunting through drills. Their breath steaming like dragons with a head cold. Swords clash. Shields splinter. Someone yells something about elbow placement. You stretch beneath your hide blanket, your back protests, your knees file a complaint. Then the door flap lifts. A shadow fills the doorway. It's Ingrid? She's taller than you, stronger than you, and has a gaze that makes tree bark flinch. She tosses a ladle into your lap and says, "You're in the pot today." You nod. Because no is not a word this camp cares about. The cooking pot is enormous, blackened, bubbling, and always suspicious. You stir it slowly with a stick that might once have been a tree or possibly a very polite club. The porridge inside is gray, lumpy, alive in a metaphorical way. You stir clockwise, then counterclockwise, then in spirals because someone told you that's the traditional way to confuse demons. Or oats. Same thing, probably. The fire beneath it spits at you. You flinch. The warriors don't. They eat fire for breakfast. You stir again. Something floats to the surface. You poke it. It's either a boiled onion or part of a boot. You stir faster. Historians still argue how food was prepared in Viking winter camps. Some say it was communal, one big pot, always on the fire, ingredients added endlessly like a stew that feared completion. Others suggest roles rotated, with the lowest-ranking unlucky soul handed the ladle of shame. Your fringe fact tonight: some Viking kitchen pits were insulated with stones, and bones were added not for flavor but to soften them until chewable. Your molars ache just thinking about it. A warrior passes behind you and sniffs the pot, then glares at you. No goat today. You shake your head. He mutters something about weak broth and walks off. You didn't even know goat was an option. Helga eyes you through the door slit. You stir faster. Someone tosses you a pouch of dried herbs. You dump them in. It smells slightly less like wet despair now. By noon, you've served 30 bowls of porridge. Some warriors grunt in approval. Some grunt in general. One asks if you added the good moss. You pretend you know what that means. You ladle your own bowl last. It's mostly paste, lightly browned, and steaming like it has dreams. You take a bite. It tastes like loneliness and optimism boiled into paste. But it's hot. And that's more than most things here. Across the fire, someone lifts a spoon in your direction. A toast. A joke. Either way you nod, because even if you're not on the sparring field, not bashing shields, not roaring about Valhalla, you're feeding the ones who do. And for now, that keeps you alive. A goat just took your blanket. You return from the fire pit exhausted, your ladle duties done, your hands burned slightly, and your stomach half full of what could charitably be called food. You're ready for a nap. A long one. The kind where you dream of actual beds and climate control. But your plank? Your sad little sleeping shelf occupied by Helga. She stares at you from atop your hide blanket like she owns rent, deed, and air rights. You hesitate. She does not. She curls tighter, lets out a long goat sigh, and closes her eyes. You try to reason with her. Off. Go on. I need that. She does not speak your language, or she does and simply does not care. You tug at the blanket's corner. She responds by digging in her hooves and chewing something from her own beard with a look that says, "Go ahead. Try me." You look around the longhouse for help. No one moves. In fact, two warriors nearby are watching this interaction closely, mugs in hand, quietly invested. One of them murmurs, "Place your bets." You sit on the edge of the plank. Helga shifts. You lean. She shifts more. You slide your arm under her belly to lift her and immediately regret everything. She lets out a noise half snort, half Viking war horn, and kicks. You fall, flat on your back, blanketless. The two warriors chuckle into their mugs. One tosses you a spare pelt. "She's claimed it," he says. You sleep elsewhere. You stare at the goat. She blinks slowly, like you've lost a game you didn't know you were playing. Historians still argue whether Viking longhouses commonly kept livestock indoors during winter. Some evidence suggests yes, animals generated warmth and protected valuable food sources from freezing. Others argue it was only in poorer camps. Either way, goats happened. Your fringe fact tonight, one Norse poem mentions a blanket-stealing goat of the gods, which scholars believe was either metaphor or someone had exactly this problem. You roll out your sleeping mat a few feet away. It's colder here. Closer to the door. The wind snakes through the cracks like it's collecting dews. You wrap yourself in the pelt you were thrown. It smells like wet dog and onions. You glare at Helga. She's already asleep. Snoring. Triumphant. You tell yourself this is temporary. That tomorrow, you'll get your blanket back. But deep down, you know Helga doesn't give things back. She inherits them. And here in the Viking camp, if a goat outranks you, you're not even at the bottom. You're just visiting. Yes, that's a bear track near the tent. You wake before dawn because something thuds outside. Not human. Not goat. Heavier. More deliberate. You freeze body halfway between dream and dread. The longhouse is still dark, filled with the slow breathing of warriors and the occasional twitchy grunt from someone who's probably battling sea serpents in their sleep. You rise, carefully, step over a snoring foot, tiptoe past Helga, who has now claimed not only your blanket but also the actual corner of the plank where your head used to go. Outside, the sky is still ink blue. The frost under your boots snaps like breaking bones. Your breath fogs in front of you, trailing off in small, nervous clouds. Then you see it. The track. Just a few paces from the door deep. Wide, fresh. A full palm width across. 5 claw marks etched into the frozen slush with precision. A bear. And not the kind that minds its business. This is the kind that tests doors, that flattens fences, that shrugs off arrows like compliments. You hear a low whistle behind you. It's Eric, the broad-shouldered warrior who once bit a raw fish in half just to prove a point. He sees the track. Grunts. Big? You nod. Because yes. Obviously. Another warrior appears, yawns, then scratches himself in a way that says he doesn't fear anything, including public decency. He glances at the print. East side. Probably after the goats. You blink. Helga. He shrugs. She had a good run. You want to be offended, but part of you thinks maybe the bear can negotiate. Historians still argue how common bear encounters were in Viking settlements. Some sagas describe them as omens, beasts sent by gods, or shape-shifted warriors cursed by fate. Others suggest bears were both respected and hunted, unless they showed up too close to the stew. Your fringe fact tonight. Some Viking helmets have been found adorned with bear teeth. Whether for protection or intimidation or posthumous trophies is still up for debate. Either way, you'd rather not collect yours from experience. A group gathers. Eric kneels near the print, tests the depth with his thumb. Still fresh. You ask, "What do we do?" He shrugs. "Wait. Watch. Don't smell like berries. You check your tunic for accidental snack residue? Just porridge stains. Probably not tempting." The warriors return to the longhouse casually like it's nothing. Like predators come with the frost. You remain outside a little longer. Looking, listening, trying not to imagine soft thuds returning. Closer, hungrier. Eventually, the sky lightens. The bear doesn't come back. Not yet, but the track remains. Like a signature. A reminder that out here, you're never alone. And some mornings, you're just lucky to still have boots. You're too slow for shield practice. You should have stayed by the fire. You should have claimed a chore like cleaning fish guts or scraping old fur. But no, you had to volunteer when the Jarl barked. We train like it was a question and a punishment rolled into one. Now you're in a frozen field with 30 Vikings, each of whom was probably born holding a sword and already mid-roar. You, on the other hand, are holding a shield that weighs approximately the same as Helga the goat, and swings just as unpredictably. The drill is simple. Line up, block, step, strike, shout. You mess it up immediately. The first clash of shields nearly bowls you over. The second knocks you down entirely. You stand, a beat too slowly. A spear haft taps your ribs lightly, but pointedly. "Dead," says Eric, grinning behind his beard. You nod. Yes, dead. Killed by training. That's a fun headline. The next round, you're paired with Ingrid. She's not gentle. She growls when she moves, like she's daring you to stay conscious. You raise your shield. Too late. Her wooden blade hits the edge and sends you spinning. You land in the snow. Helga walks by. She does not stop to help. Historians still argue how standardized Viking combat training was. Some say it was largely improvised, built on hunting, raiding, and family feuds. Others suggest organized drills, especially during winter camps, with formations, rhythm, and enough shouting to make the ice retreat. Your fringe fact tonight. One Icelandic manuscript describes a training technique where warriors dodged swinging logs suspended from tree branches, kind of like Viking tetherball. If the ball wanted you unconscious, you roll back to your feet. This time, you raise the shield just in time to deflect Ingrid's next strike. She nods. Better. You feel that nod like sunlight? Then she kicks your legs out and you go down again. Still bad, she says. But there's a smirk behind it, which is the Viking version of applause. You survive the rest of the session by becoming a human sandbag with aspirations. You block twice. You don't cry. You get a small cut on your knuckle that bleeds impressively. Someone claps you on the back afterward. Not the worst. You limp away like you won something, because here in the camp, not the worst is practically a medal. And tomorrow you might even dodge that first swing. That soup might be fish eyes. You're invited to dinner tonight. Well summoned. No one exactly asked you. A warrior just tossed you a carved spoon and pointed at the longhouse hearth like it owed you money. You shuffle in, sore from training, damp from snowmelt, and half convinced your ankle has filed a formal protest. The warmth hits you first blessed, smoky, and laced with the smell of something that once swam and recently lost the will to live. A large cauldron bubbles ominously at the center of the hearth. It's the same one used for morning porridge, post-mead broth, and you suspect goat washing. You don't ask what's in it, because asking gets you looked at. You accept a wooden bowl filled to the rim with the stew that's equal parts murky liquid and floating mystery. You spot fins, something gelatinous, a few things that resemble eyeballs. They move slightly when you stir. You glance at the warrior beside you already slurping. He says, "Fish eyes see your soul." You don't respond. You take a bite. Warm, salty, slightly chewy. Not bad. Definitely alarming, though. The texture is like someone boiled ambition until it gave up. Historians still argue whether Viking winter meals were primarily fish-based or diversified with preserved meats, grains, and root vegetables. Evidence suggests stews were common, and ingredients were flexible salted cod, dried eel, fermented lamb, turnips if you were lucky, and sometimes things better left unnamed. Your fringe fact tonight: one preserved Viking recipe included a broth made from boiled whale fat and onions. It was a delicacy, or a dare, depending on the region. You go in for a second bite. This one crunches. You don't think about it too hard. Better to treat each spoonful like an adventure you didn't sign up for. The conversation around you hums low voices, half jokes. Stories of raids and frostbitten enemies. One guy claiming he once punched lightning. Someone sings a verse of a saga. Someone else belches a response. You sit quietly and eat your bowl dry. You get offered seconds. You politely decline. The warrior across from you picks his teeth with a fishbone and grins. You eat quiet. You'll live longer. You smile, then nod. Because apparently, chewing loudly in front of Vikings is a death-adjacent offense. You slip outside afterward. You breathe in cool air. You swallow the last bit that stuck in your molars, hoping it wasn't organ meat. You're not full, but you're not hungry anymore either. And that counts as a win, especially when you've just willingly eaten something that watched you back. The skald turns your suffering into a song. You should have known it was coming. This morning, you slipped. Not just any slip, a grand. Sweeping, arms flailing, legs above head spectacle while carrying a bucket of fish heads to the compost pit. You landed flat on your back with a splash, a grunt, and the collective groan of dignity leaving your body. It wouldn't have been so bad except everyone saw. Even Helga. And Helga looked disappointed. But the real problem, Skald Frodi saw it. He's the camp's official singer, poet, and professional rememberer of things. Others wish he'd forget. That evening, during fire hour, he cleared his throat. Everyone turned. He began to chant. And there it was, your fall immortalized in poetic couplets and dripping sarcasm, complete with hand gestures, dramatic sound effects, and a verse that rhymed head meat bucket with luckless muppet. Laughter erupted. You smiled weakly. One warrior laughed so hard he spilled his mead. Another pretended to reenact your fall using a turnip and a spoon. You are now officially a camp saga. Historians still argue how influential skalds were in Viking life, whether they were entertainers, political advisors, or truth-warping propagandists. Some were revered like celebrities. Others were tolerated like enthusiastic uncles with too much ale and too few boundaries. Your fringe fact tonight. One saga details a skald so feared for his insults that an entire village paid him not to write about them. That's right. Protection poetry. Frodi finishes with a flourish and bows. Everyone claps. Someone slaps you on the back. You're famous now. You nod. Of course, you're legendary for becoming one with the fish pit. A warrior leans over. Could have been worse. He once wrote a verse about a man who sneezed on the Jarl. You say, what happened to him? Nothing, he says, but the sneeze became a metaphor for betrayal. He hasn't lived it down in 5 winters. Later, Frodi offers you a drink. Good sport. He says, tomorrow it'll be someone else. You take the cup because you're not dumb enough to offend the camp's memory. And deep down, you know something else. As long as they're laughing at you, they're not testing you. And if you're in a skald's song, you're part of the story now. Even if it starts with the fall and ends with the goat watching, you've been voted most likely to die tonight. You find out during a casual moment just before sunset, when everyone's gathered near the longhouse hearth, picking bones out of their stew and pretending they don't notice the wind creeping in under the door. A warrior named Bjorn sits back, belly full, and says loudly, well, might as well take bets now. Someone grunts. On what Bjorn smirks, which one of us won't see the dawn? Laughter follows, but not the funny kind. The kind that says, we've actually done this before. Frodi the Skald pulls out a small leather pouch. Inside 6 bone tokens, each etched with a different rune. He tosses them into the firelight one by one. This one's Eric. This one's Ingrid. This one's Goat. Helga bleats. Laughter again. Then Frodi holds up the last token. Blank. This one's the guest. Everyone looks at you. You blink. They nod. You are now officially the camp underdog, the statistical favorite to freeze, starve, or fall into another pit before sunrise. The game isn't cruel, just honest. Historians still argue whether Viking camps used gallows humor to cope with harsh winters. Some accounts mention betting games, dark jokes, even mock funerals for still living comrades who looked frost-shy. Others think this is exaggerated, probably by the same people who thought dragons lived in caves. Your fringe fact tonight. A Viking poem describes a midwinter feast where one man was toasted as most recently alive and cheered as he tried to walk outside. He made it to the door. Not beyond. You stare at the blank token. Someone pats your shoulder. Don't take it personal. You nod. Someone else says, could be worse. Last week's pick fell in the river and lived and then froze. They all nod like that's just science. You sip your drink. Carefully. You laugh when they do. And inside, you try not to shiver because they'll notice. And if they notice, you might prove them right. So you tell yourself not tonight. Tonight, you'll stay warm. You'll stay awake. You'll avoid all holes in the ice, arguments with bears, and anything Frodi finds rhymable. You go to your plank. Helga's gone for now. You curl up tight and whisper to the rafters. Let the goat get voted next time. They let the dog inside before you. It's snowing sideways, not falling. Not drifting, attacking. You stand outside the longhouse with a bundle of firewood in your arms and flakes in your eyelashes. The door flaps closed. Smoke curls from the rooftop vent. It smells like charred meat and mild survival. You knock. Twice. No answer. You shift the firewood. Knock again, louder this time. From inside, muffled voices. Then the flap opens, just wide enough for someone to step out. Not you. The dog. A shaggy, one-eyed beast named Bruni trots past you, tail wagging, tongue out, completely unbothered by the blizzard. He shakes, snow flying in all directions, then noses your thigh like you're the slowest moving tree stump he's ever sniffed. You nod respectfully. He's killed things larger than you? The flap closes again. You're still holding the wood. You knock a third time. This time, Ingrid opens it. She sees you. Then the firewood. Then you again. You smell like soup, she says. You say nothing. She takes the wood. You reach for the flap. She steps inside, shuts it. Historians still argue whether Viking dogs were house animals or just valued hunters and guards. Bones found in burial mounds suggest deep affection. Sagas mention dogs who warned of danger, guarded livestock, and once, allegedly, carried messages during a siege. Your fringe fact tonight: some Viking families named their dogs after gods. Odin, Freki, Skål, and believed they guided souls to the afterlife. Which makes you wonder if Bruni is secretly the camp's gatekeeper, and he just denied your passage. You finally get let in 5 minutes later by a child. You say thank you. They shrug and offer you a piece of stale bread. You take it. Inside, Bruni is curled near the fire on a fur you didn't know was available. You sit on your plank, still partially damp. You wring out your cloak. Bruni stretches luxuriously, licks his paw, then passes gas in your direction. You accept this as a Viking blessing. Because tonight, you learned the hierarchy warriors first, then Helga, then Bruni, then the soup pot, then you, but you're still inside. That's what counts. You're not frozen. You're not forgotten. You're just beneath the dog. And honestly, you've been worse. Your boots are on fire, literally. You try to be practical today. The snow's been soaking through your boots for days now, turning your toes into sad little ice sculptures with zero traction and even less dignity. So you take them off finally and place them near the fire. Not too close. You think. You sit beside them, watching the steam rise, the leather crinkle, and the seams begin to sigh with the kind of relief usually reserved for tired knees and disappointed parents. And then you nod off. Just a little. Maybe 30 seconds. Just enough for the warmth to seduce you into temporary oblivion. When you wake smoke, you lurch upright. Your left boot is smoldering. Not flaming exactly, more like grumbling in heat. A black streak curls up the side, and a thin thread of smoke rises in a way that feels pointed, judgmental. You scramble, grab a ladle, slap the boot with the back of it. Then, realizing that's not helping, throw your water flask on it. Now you have one wet, burned boot. The warriors around you glance over briefly. Frodi the Skald says, perhaps they wish to be cremated. Someone snorts. You sigh. Historians still argue what Viking winter footwear truly looked like. Some believe in thick, fur-lined boots made of stitched reindeer hide. Others point to open-laced shoes wrapped with wool and dreams. But everyone agrees on one thing: they were precious. Losing boots was a big deal. Your fringe fact tonight in Greenland: some Viking graves show burial without shoes, possibly indicating status or theft after death. Because even dead men didn't get to keep warm feet forever. You inspect the damage. The left boot is still wearable. Technically, if you don't mind walking with the distinct limp and constant fear of collapse, you spend the rest of the day airing it out. then rewrapping it with spare cloth and muttering oaths to whatever deity handles footwear. Bruni walks by. He pauses, sniffs the boot, then pees on it. You don't stop him. You just stare into the middle distance and reassess your life. You go to bed with your feet wrapped in cloth, your pride slightly scorched, and the faint smell of smoke still in your nose. You dream of sandals, sun, and toes that feel like part of your body again. But until then, you've learned a hard truth in a Viking camp. If it's dry and warm, it's probably too close to the fire. The chieftain wants your opinion run. Dinner's over. The fire's low. Everyone's stretching or cracking joints or poking the embers with sticks that may or may not be ceremonial weapons. You're minding your own business, quietly gnawing on the world's driest crust of bread, when a voice cuts through the smoky murmur like a thrown axe. You look up. It's him, the chieftain. Tall, broad, beard like a woven curse, and eyes that have witnessed things best left unspoken. He's seated on a carved bench that's technically just a log, but feels spiritually superior to any other wood in camp. He points directly at you. I want your thoughts. A ripple of silence follows. Even Bruni stops licking his paw. Your brain empties. Thoughts about what the porridge, the war, the weather, your still damp boot. You nod slowly. About what chieftain? He gestures at the fire, then at Frodi, then at Eric. We argue Thor or Odin who wins in battle. You blink. This is not a conversation you're qualified for. You're still recovering from being bested by a goat. And now you're expected to settle a theological cage match. Everyone is watching. Frodi raises an eyebrow. Eric crosses his arms. The chieftain waits. Historians still argue how Viking spiritual debates unfolded, whether they were solemn affairs, drunk musings, or both. Some say each clan had its own favorite god. Others claim most simply prayed to whoever seemed likeliest to get results that day. Your fringe fact tonight. In one surviving poem, a mortal claims Loki is strongest because he fights unfairly, but always survives. The skald was later exiled or promoted. Sources differ. You clear your throat. Well, Thor is strength. Odin is strategy, but neither wins without the other. Someone murmurs. Safe answer. Frodi chuckles. Poetic. Eric frowns but doesn't punch you. The chieftain nods once. You'll make a good thrall, he says. You're not sure if that's praise or a threat. Either way, you're still breathing. He turns away. The conversation resumes. You quietly resume chewing your bread. Your heart pounds like war drums played with soup ladles. Later, Ingrid claps you on the shoulder. You didn't die, she says. That's the bar. It's winter. Fair enough. You lie awake that night, replaying the moment. Not because you impressed the chieftain, but because now they think you have thoughts. And in this camp, thinking is almost as dangerous as talking. You lost the bone dice, and your dignity. Evening has fallen like a wet blanket. Everyone's eaten, mostly in silence, except for Bruni, who devoured someone's leftover stew when they weren't looking and was only mildly rebuked with a pat and a clever beast. Now it's time for games, not the kind with rules, not the kind with mercy. Frodi opens a leather pouch and spills a handful of bone dice onto a wooden board. Some are carved with runes. Some just have faint dots. One is clearly a sheep tooth. He looks around and says, "We play for stakes." You hesitate. What kind of stakes, you ask? Frodi grins. Fish? Firewood? Shame. You nod like this is a totally normal sentence. You're dealt in. You're partnered with Ingrid? She does not smile. She tells you to throw with honor. You try. Your first roll is 2 ones. Frody cackles. Eric slaps the board. Ingrid exhales through her nose like you just insulted her entire ancestry. You lose the round. You hand over your last piece of dried cod. Next round, you try to redeem yourself. You roll a 6 in a rune that you're told means bad goat omen. Frody declares it a loss. Someone else loses and has to recite a verse from memory. They fail. They're told to fetch ice water for the fire pit shirtless. You're now playing for survival by humiliation. Historians still argue how widespread Viking dice games were. Some say they were training for rating, teaching, risk, and boldness. Others think they were just excuses to gamble and get under each other's skin before cabin fever set in. Your fringe fact tonight. One Viking dice set was carved from walrus ivory and buried with its owner because, even in death, you needed luck. By your 5th loss, you're down a spoon, a belt loop, and your ability to make eye contact with Ingrid? She says nothing, which is worse. Frody raises the stakes. Winner gets to sleep closest to the fire. Every face turns toward the board. You roll, it bounces, lands in a crack. Everyone leans in. It's a rune no one recognizes. Frody declares it null. You are out. The goat bleats in agreement. You spend the rest of the game as an observer and occasional cup filler. When Ingrid wins a round without you, she mutters, "Better odds alone." You nod. Accept it. Because here, your worth is measured in warmth, strength, and dice luck. And tonight you're broke on all 3. You crawl into your spot by the door. Bruni has moved closer to the fire. Helga has your pelt. You have a sock. 1. Unmatched. But at least you weren't the one sent shirtless into the snow. Yet. The longship's gone and so's your exit plan. It starts with a question. A simple, hopeful, slightly desperate question that's been buzzing in your brain since the day you arrived. When does the longship head back? You ask it casually, quietly, over porridge, to a man who seems old enough to know things and bored enough to answer. He looks up, chews slowly, then says, "It left 3 days ago." You wait for a punchline. It doesn't come. You blink. "But I thought it left in spring." He shrugs. "It was full." You try again. There's another one. "Though, right. No room." Someone else chimes in, not even looking up from their fishbone carving. Another adds, "They needed space for oars and pelts, and more useful people." The fire crackles, the silence stretches, and slowly, coldly, the truth settles over you like the snowfall outside you're not leaving. Not soon, not by ship, not on purpose. Historians still argue how frequently Viking ships traveled during winter. Most sources agree rarely. Icy seas, frozen harbors, and sudden storms made it risky. But if a vessel had to leave messengers, urgent cargo, surprise raids, it left fast, and it didn't wait. Your fringe fact tonight. Some Viking ships were purposely beached for winter, turned into shelters, storage, or even temporary altars. So if you missed your ride, you might end up sleeping inside the hull as part of it. You ask what your options are. "Stay," says one. "Shovel," says another. "Learn to wrestle goats," mutters someone near the door. You nod. You don't cry, because that would freeze on your face and create a conversation. Instead, you go outside. You look toward the sea. It's gray, wide, mocking, no sails in sight. You stare until your eyelashes crust. You walk back to camp slower than usual, like you're dragging the idea of escape behind you like a sled with no runners. At dinner, no one mentions it again. You're not the first to be left behind. You won't be the last. But now you're something new, permanent, and in a Viking winter camp. Permanence is not a compliment. It's a test. You're too cold to curse anymore. It's the kind of cold that rewires your vocabulary, where once you had sentences, now you have groans. Where you used to mutter complaints, now you just exhale slowly, audibly, and hope someone interprets it as shared misery. Your lips are cracked. Your nose no longer functions as a nose, just a decorative icicle above your mouth. Your hands technically still there, but you're not sure. You haven't felt them since breakfast. The wind finds every gap in your clothes like it's playing hide and seek with your will to live. Today's chore: ice chipping, which sounds fun if you're a glacier with self-esteem issues. You're handed a flat bone with a jagged edge and sent to carve frozen slush out of the water trough so the livestock can drink. The trough is a coffin made of wood and failure. You chip once, the ice laughs. You chip again. Your wrist sends a formal protest to your spine. You take a break after 3 minutes and try to wiggle your fingers. They don't wiggle. They simply acknowledge the concept of movement and file it under pending spring. Nearby, Eric chips ice with a rhythm that suggests he's composing a saga in his head, probably about your incompetence. Bruni walks by with a piece of fur in his mouth. You eye the fur like a man stares at a roast in church. Helga watches you work and, for once, doesn't interfere. Historians still argue whether cold itself was a greater threat in Viking camps than disease or hunger. Some records imply yes, entire villages decimated by frost. Others say people adapted quickly, or just didn't last long enough to complain. Your fringe fact tonight: in some Norse texts, ice blindness was common. Snow glare so intense it stole your sight for days. They used soot under the eyes, or bone visors with narrow slits. You consider making one out of your dignity. By mid-afternoon, your arms ache. Your face feels wooden. Your thoughts are wrapped in wool. You lean on your bone tool and look up at the sky. It's pale, unapologetic. You whisper. Warmth. Just the word, but it feels theological. Later, by the fire, you don't even bother sitting close. You just lean in at a safe distance and wait for your breath to turn back into vapor instead of icicles. Someone passes you a cup. It's warm. You hold it like treasure. Not for drinking, just holding. Because when your body forgets how to curse, it remembers how to thank. Even if it's just for heat in your palms. Sleep comes like a wolf at the door. The fire's burned low. Shadows stretch across the longhouse like tired giants, curling under benches and across sleeping limbs. You're on your plank, wrapped in every pelt, rag, and leftover sock you could beg or borrow. Even Helga has decided not to fight you tonight for space. Bruni snores from somewhere near the hearth, curled up like a well-fed oracle. You're not warm, but you're not shivering. And that, in Viking terms, is luxury. Someone mutters in their sleep. A warrior coughs twice and rolls over. Frodi whispers a verse to no one in particular, maybe to keep the dreams away, or maybe to feed them. You close your eyes, and sleep approaches, not gently, not like a mother's hand or a lullaby. Sleep here comes like a wolf. It prowls the edge of your senses, stalks your exhaustion, sniffs at your weakness. You have to let it in carefully, one breath at a time, without flinching. You listen to the room, the creak of timber, the drip of melted snow sliding off the roof, the breath of 50 bodies trying not to freeze. You don't think about the longship, or the goat, or the fact that someone carved a rune into your plank that loosely translates to, "This one dies slow." You focus on the dark. And finally, sleep sinks its teeth into you. Not cruelly, just firmly enough to pull you down. And in the last blink of consciousness, you think you made it. Not through winter, but through a day, and in a Viking winter camp. That's everything. And now, let it all fade. Let the snow settle outside your mind like a quiet hush across the fields, soft and slow and blanketing the world in peace. There are no more chores tonight. No more firewood to split. No more fish to stir or boots to save or goats to negotiate with. Only breath. Only stillness. Let your body soften. Feel the weight of your limbs melt into whatever you're lying on. Let your fingers stop curling. Let your jaw unclench. There's no need to be ready anymore. The shield can rest. The ladle can rest. Even the part of you that has been bracing constantly, quietly for one more task. One more noise. One more word that might make the camp turn its head toward you. That part can rest now too. Breathe. Let the rhythm of it become your fire. Steady. Low. Warming from the inside. You survived cold that wanted to bite. You survived meat that wanted to judge. You survived a camp that expected nothing from you except not to fall asleep first and never wake again. And you did it. You made it through one day. The fire has dimmed. The longhouse is quiet. And outside, the night watches. But you're not afraid. Not tonight. Sleep now, deep, still like snow over stone.